Welcome to Uriah Heep, the Magician's Podcast. I'll be covering every studio song the band has recorded and every bonus track that I can find. Each week we'll go over a new song from the beginning to where they are currently, and as they keep adding albums, I'll keep adding shows. Let the deep dive party begin.
In the magic garden, some were singing, some were dancing.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Uriah Heep, the Magician's Podcast. I am your host, Scott Haskin, here with another episode from the Totally Driven double album or double CD, however you might have it. I don't know if this was released in vinyl or not, to be honest. I got it on digital download from Amazon quite happily and for a pretty good price, I have to say. The nice thing was I didn't have to find it used, which made me very happy. That means eventually the band will get like 0.2 cents. Now, the only thing written here on Wikipedia, which, as we all know, is the most solid place on the planet, maybe even the universe, where you can get the most, untouchably accurate information ever. But basically, here's what it has to say. This was released in November of 2015 on their own label, Uriah Heep Records. By the way, great idea to start your own record company. You have so much more control, so much more say over what happens than when you're depending on somebody else. But on the flip side of that, you also have all your own responsibility. Deep Purple had Purple Records, which I thought was a good idea. I don't know if Metallica ever did or not, but I always thought they should own their own record company instead of being, put under someone else. But, sometimes it might just be more than it's worth. It just depends. But boy, if anybody would have had the opportunity to conquer that market for themselves, Metallica would have had a great chance at that. It does go on to say that the album contains re-recorded versions of 27 of their best-known songs recorded with the long-standing 86 to 2007 lineup, which, as we all know, is Lee Kerslake, Trevor, Mick Box, Bernie Shaw, and, of course, Phil Lanzon. It goes on to say the album was originally released in 2001 with a different track order as Remasters, the official anthology. But it went out of print quite quickly and was forgotten about. It was reissued in 2004 as Uriah Heep's Gold, looking back 1970 to 2001, without the band's knowledge, by a European budget label, which means basically somebody found a way to do a cash grab and, try and make some money, not a major label, just some, small label. The only other thing it says is, according to guitarist Mick Box, the songs were recorded in preparation for the acoustically driven and electrically driven concerts. And again, as I talked about on the Gypsy episode, it kind of makes sense because, like I said, it really feels like this was recorded in a live setting, almost like it was captured at a concert. It just has that feel, which I kind of like. Like I said, if you're going to re-record songs, what's the point of re-recording them the way they were before? Unless they were previously unreleased and you just like, hey, we're finally going to release the song, let's re-record it and put it out there. I could totally understand that. Maybe include the original version as a bonus track or something on that release. But other than that, like if you're going to take the time to re-record songs, especially your own, do something different with them. They should have a life of their own, be able to stand on their own as an individual song. And so far, the one song we've reviewed, Gypsy, certainly did that. I thought that was a great version. Had I not heard the original version, this would be my favorite version. But, at this point, I've been listening to songs for 30 plus years now. It's going to be really hard for me to find a version that I'm going to say, you know what, I like this better than the original, because there's so much that goes into it, like nostalgia and, you're comfortable with the mix in certain instruments. You're expecting certain sounds. And when they're not played the same way at the same time, it feels awkward or difficult. So while I'm doing the reviews of this album and Celebrations, our next season, I'm really going to try and not compare. I probably will make comparison references at some point, but I'm not going to focus on that. I really want to just look at this song as it is on its own, try and forget the original as much as possible. I may make like a tempo comparison or, an instrument comparison or something like that. But I really just want to take this song that I'm hearing today as I review it on its own and judge it as I will. Now, before we get into it, a couple of things. And one thing I want to point out too, I remember reading in one of the forums a while back somebody had posted something about a more obscure track. It wasn't, like one of the main popular tracks, but it was like an album track. And they said, wow, I really love this song because it reminds me of this and this, a very special time in their life. There was all these memories and nostalgia and just a certain period for them that this song reminded them of, and they really connected with it. And somebody wrote in and said something like, well, you shouldn't like that song. You should like this other song because it's a better song. First of all, why can't we like both songs? There's room for every great song in our hearts. I don't think there's any limitation on the things we're allowed to like. Better is always a subjective thing anyway. Maybe this person that was replying had similar memories associated with a different song. But my point was they weren't listening to what the person was saying. They weren't talking about as much the quality of the song as all their associated memories with it. So when it comes to this album and the next album, that's what I'm talking about. It might be really hard for me to say I like this version better only because these versions that I'm hearing today are fighting against that attachment of nostalgia and memories and all that stuff. Now, some of the songs I'm not as familiar with because I may have only heard them at the time I reviewed them. So, those might, but in any case, there's a lot more that goes into liking a song more than just, I heard it and I think it's a great song. Speaking of great songs, there are a lot of great shows that review great music on the Deep Dive Podcast Network. I am honored to say that this podcast is on that network, and I'm going to tell you about the other shows. First, I'll just make a quick side note. You can also find me and album reviews, interviews, show reviews, sometimes movie reviews on the Haskincast podcast. That comes out every Wednesday at 1 a.m. Los Angeles time, 9 o'clock for you folks in England. And I do have a lot of listeners across the pond. So thank you guys for all those who have checked out that show. I recently did of course, by the time this comes out, it'll be a little bit later, but I did a review of Ken Hensley's 6-part box set that came out on Cherry Red Records. Also did a review of Bernie Marsden's 4-CD box set that came out from Cherry Red as well. Loving the relationship I have with them. People have asked me if I'm going to dig into the deep catalog of all the Uriah Heep alumni. I don't really have the intention of doing that, but there are certain ones that I may want to review or opportunities I have, like the Ken Hensley one that came up that I thought, yeah, this would be a good one to review. Those won't be part of this podcast because this is really dedicated more directly to the music that was recorded and released by Uriah Heep. But check back with the Haskincast podcast from time to time. Those albums may appear here and there from time to time. From time to time, no pun intended. The other shows, though, that are in the Deep Dive Podcast Network, I do another show with John Mariano and Corey Morissette called Backtracks Aerosmith Revisited. We are in the process of making the ultimate Aerosmith mixtapes. We have a live tape, we have a hits tape, we have our personal selections, and we have our sort of, not spotlighted album tracks compilation. So 4 sides to the dual mixtape, I guess. And we just, review a song, decide whether it belongs on there or not. We vote things off. We add things. It's a really cool thing. And we got a long way to go on that show because we're doing all the live tracks as well. So that gives us an awful lot to work with. John and Corey also do another show called Backtracks Theme Music, talking about music in film and television shows, which is really cool. Corey does another show with Mark Kameyer, and this one is called And the Podcast Will Rock, all things Van Halen. We have Nate and John at the Deep Purple podcast, The Simple Man at Skinner Reconsidered, Terry T-Bone Mathley at T-Bone's Prime Cuts on the Other Side, Rye at Sabbath's Bloody Podcast. Yeah. Okay. I've done too many podcasts today. Paul, Joe, and David at In the Lap of the Pods, a Queen podcast. Andy and Matt at Hawk Binge, a Hawkwind podcast. Eric and Jonathan at Maiden A to Z, all things Iron Maiden. Daniel and Josh at Diary of the Madmen, the ultimate Aussie podcast. We have Ben and Sam at Universally Speaking, the Red Hot Chili Peppers podcast. George and Hattie over at the Judas Priest podcast. Clay and Rye at North by South podcast. Greg and Jonathan at So Far, So Pod, So What. Kevin at the Tom Petty Project. Kevin also does a show with Randy, the Seaside Pod Review. We have Quinn at And Volume for All, and Sav, Nick, Steve, and Mark at the Rock Roulette Podcast. I also want to throw a shout out to Brandon at Metallicast, my favorite Metallica podcast. Now let's get into today's song. Today's song was originally recorded on the Demons and Wizards album. That was my introduction to Uriah Heep, that album. And this is called Traveler in Time. I'm not sure what kind of reverb they're using on the drums, if it's a plate reverb or what, but it does make the drums sound a little bit echoey, I want to say. Pretty good, powerful opening. A lot of keyboards in it. It's really nice to hear that thick Hammond in there. The balance might be a little off, though. I think we're getting a little too much organ and not enough guitar. Other than that, it sounds good. I'm able to hear the bass, which is nice. It's great to hear Lee and Trevor again. Really nice to hear them breathe some life into these songs. Some of these they had played on previously. Some of them they hadn't. This was on Demons and Wizards, which was, of course, Lee Kerslake's first album. And let's see where it goes with these guys.
Every day I have to look to the sun to see where it was that I had come from. I have a feeling that there must be a time when I'll get a chance to go home.
Wow, I love how gritty Bernie sounds when he comes in for that. I really like the higher voice too. I think that sounds really good. He's singing it very linear, very on the beat, as it were. But I like the sound of his voice in that range. I think that this is more what we probably hear layered from him in backup than we do as a lead vocal. So this is a nice change of pace. I wouldn't want a ton of this, but it's nice to pull out of the bag every once in a while.
'Cause I'm so tired of being here alone, but I'm just a traveler in time, trying so hard just to pay for my crime.
I think I know why I'm not hearing as much guitar as I had expected. I think Mick is playing an acoustic in this one. I could be wrong, but I'm not hearing an electric guitar. I'm hearing the strumming sounds, not as much the melodic tone, but I'm hearing more like the strumming sounds of an acoustic. And that would explain it. Now, again, if this was in preparation for both acoustically and electrically driven, I would expect there's probably going to be a back and forth of both electric and acoustic songs. Obviously, I was thinking originally like songs like The Wizard would be part of the acoustic set. I would have thought a song like this would be part of the electric set, and maybe it was. But it sounds like Mick's playing an acoustic here. That's pretty interesting. That would definitely change the balance of it, because a Hammond organ would easily overpower the sound of an acoustic guitar, whereas an electric guitar could really balance that drive a little bit more. Very interesting.
If I could go back the same way I got here, see the people that I once held so near.
This always happens, and it's the benefit of not knowing the song, this version of the song before you listen to it. There's your electric guitar right there. So I don't know. I would think that the way that they would have done this in preparation for a live concert would be, let's just record it live. No overdubs unless we really need to. But I don't know, maybe Mick was using an acoustic simulator. Maybe he had it more muted, and I was just getting more the strum of the strings and not that heavy distortion. But I'm definitely hearing that wah pedal guitar back in the mix now as soon as I said he was playing acoustic. So, joke's on me.
Do my best to find an answer for you. But first, I must wait till I'm set free. And I don't know how long that's gonna be. 'Cause I'm a man with a whole lot on his mind. Just out there somewhere traveling in time.
I like this. It's got a real energy to it, and I like that there's really no vocal overdubs. again, just thinking in the mindset of this is preparation for a live concert. But I like that it's just kind of like a raw performance without worrying about the crowd being there. If they didn't like the take, they could just do another take and really, bring something great to each song. Yeah, this is cool. I'm digging this version.
Traveling in time. I've tried for so long to find some way of helping mankind.
Some great snare work there from Lee, and really nice vocals from Bernie. I really like that. I like that little bit of flange they put in the end, and the delay on that really added a lot to it. Again, something that I would totally expect they would do live. But also just that uptick in note there. That was nice too. I didn't expect he was going to do that. Really cool. Full of surprises, this stuff is. And this is the beauty of the current band at this time that they're recording this and their imprint on the older songs. And as you see bands, as they've changed members for whatever the reasons are, the band that you see when they go back and play some of those older songs. I remember when I met Roger Glover on the Abandon tour for Deep Purple, I had mentioned that even the older songs seem to have all this new life in them since Steve had joined the band, Steve Morse. And it's very much the same thing here. When a new member joins the band, they're like, I get to play these songs that I've listened to with this band. Now I'm playing on them. And there's some balance between wanting to pay homage, I guess, to the original, but also, putting a little bit of your own stamp on it too. I think they're doing a pretty good job of keeping it relatively close to the original so far on the two songs that we've done. But I would say that I do feel like they are a little bit different. They do feel a little bit more live, and they do have a different kind of energy to them. Feel like they knew what I was going to say when they were recording this, which of course would have been absolutely astronomically impossible. But that end kind of lacked some energy for me. But again, this goes to why I don't like listening to live albums at home very much, because there's the energy of being there, of seeing the band perform, of why is the tempo a little bit faster than I'm used to? Why are they playing it differently from the studio version that I've been listening to for all these years? That's the beauty of seeing something live. Listening to live music at home, it's out of context. It doesn't have the same energy of being in the crowd and watching the band play, and all the anticipation building up to the show from the time it was announced and you got your ticket and you can't wait and you're telling your friends and imagining the concert in your head and where the stage is compared to where your ticket is, or all these things that go into enjoying a show. And I feel like that is often lacking when you just listen to a live album. It just doesn't have that for me. So while I can say on record, this last section of Traveler in Time really just kind of dropped out for me. I mean, there was a couple of just spaces that were just too open, and I felt just needed something more. But had I been there, maybe there would have been, a look to the crowd instead of silence, just something that would have been a visual cue to make up for the lack of music that we would have been expecting in those sections. So that being the case, these things for me don't always translate to, listening at home on a record or whatever. So overall, though, I thought it was a pretty cool version. I really like Bernie's vocals on this. I thought it was pretty energetic until the end. The Hammond sounded great. I love how Mick tricked me with that muted guitar. But it definitely, wow, that really sounded like an acoustic. And I'm going to guess that they really didn't do overdubs on this. I'm going to guess this was a live, we got it, move on to the next song kind of project. 27 songs would be a lot to record in a studio if you're doing overdubs and all that kind of thing. So I don't imagine a lot of that was done, if any at all. But yeah, cool version. I dig it. So what is today? Today's Tuesday. Of course, it's like Sunday when I'm recording it, but today's Tuesday. So have a great day tomorrow. And I'll be doing an episode of the Haskincast podcast tomorrow. Be back Thursday for another episode of Uriah Heep, the Magician's Podcast. Cheers. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Uriah Heep, the Magician's Podcast. If you have enjoyed this show, please consider going over to Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast outlet, leaving a rating or a review. Be sure to subscribe to make sure that you are notified when new episodes are available. Please be sure to share this podcast with your fellow Uriah Heep enthusiasts and anyone who you think would like Uriah Heep, which should be everyone. And if you are so inclined, please feel free to contribute to the Patreon account. And if you are not a Patreon subscriber, you can also pay through the PayPal link on the website listed in the show links below. I would also like to thank Uriah Heep for their very generous support of the show. And thank you guys for listening. We'll see you in the next episode. Happy days!